Now, the Israel-Iran war, it ended as abruptly as it began. Iran and Israel agreed to a ceasefire, which was announced by the US president, following mediations by the Qatari government. And now a new report has emerged, and it sheds light on why the US may have asked Iran for a truce. Now, as per the report, 70% of the missiles which Iran used against Israel were older generation missiles, while its newer, deadlier, next generation missiles saw minimal use in this battle. The report states that Iran mostly used Kader and Imad missiles against Israel. Kader missiles, well, they are an improved version of the Shahab-3 medium-range ballistic missile, which has been in Iranian service since 2003. The missile comes in 3 variants and has a range between 1350 to 1950 kilometers, and it carries a payload of 650 kilograms. Then the Imad ballistic missile is an upgraded variant of the Kader and comes with enhanced guidance and accuracy. It was commissioned in late 2015. The Imad missiles have a range of 1700 kilometers. It carries a payload of 750 kilograms. Now, even these older missiles in Iran's arsenal demonstrated remarkable accuracy, and they penetrated right through Israel's famed air defenses, causing widespread damage and destruction across Israel. From capital Tel Aviv to Haifa, Ramat Gan and Beersheba, several Israeli cities were witness to Iranian strikes, reducing buildings to a clump of twisted metal bars and debris, driving home the power of Iranian missiles. Even the US president acknowledged the scale of the destruction which was caused by Iran's attack. Speaking at the NATO summit earlier in the week, Trump said that Iran and Israel, they both fought like hell, and it wasn't easy to stop them.
They're not going to be fighting each other. They've had it. They've had a big fight, like 2 kids in a schoolyard. You know, they fight like hell. You can't stop them. Let them fight for about 2-3 minutes, then it's easier to stop them.
Now, this brings us to an interesting question. Why did Iran hold back from using its newer, more powerful and lethal missiles? Iranian missile arsenal consists of ballistic missiles like the Sejil-2, Fateh-1 and Khyber-Shekan, which have a range of up to 2,000 kilometers and carry payloads up to 700 kilograms. Now, these reports suggest that Iran may actually be preparing for a long, protracted war with Israel and intends to gradually introduce its diverse missile arsenal. While it remains unclear whether the scale and the scope of the damage which was unleashed by Iranian missiles pushed the US to seek a ceasefire, that's not confirmed, but what is undisputed is that Iran managed to evade Israeli air defenses, even with its older first-generation missiles. And it may have far more lethal and newer age missiles in its arsenal, which Israel has not seen yet. All right, joining us on the broadcast now is Chris Doyle, Director of Kabul Council for Arab-British Understanding. He's joining us live from London. Thanks so much for joining us here, Chris. Now,
a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, Chris, we saw Israel sustain a considerable amount of damage. Those visuals of missiles coming into Israel, they went across the world. Even Trump acknowledged Iran's fight. Was Trump compelled to call for a truce, seeing the damage inflicted by Iran? What's your take on this report?
I don't think Trump was compelled to it because of that. I mean, this is a factor. I mean, this is war, and missiles did get through, and it did some damage to Israel. And I think it was the Israeli leadership who probably had the most to worry about if there was going to be a protracted war in which some of those more improved, enhanced missiles were beginning to land on Israel. But I think actually there are other reasons to take into account as to why Trump wanted a ceasefire. Primarily, he didn't want the United States. And he does think, remember, he is an American first president. He always considers that narrow US interest, the Trump interest as well. And he's always opposed getting involved in these protracted wars. He got elected on that basis. And much of his MAGA base also was opposed to getting stuck in. So I think after he had ordered those strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, he was keen on getting back to a ceasefire. I think the Iranians were too. And that also explains why they did a very well advertised, telegraphed strike on the Al Udeid base in Qatar, because they didn't do any serious damage. They made sure that they weren't going to have any fatalities, so that they could get back to a negotiating table. Because ultimately, yes, Iran can hurt Israel, but the combination of Israel and the United States against Iran is not a military match at all. And actually, you could say that for regime preservation, they wanted to keep those missiles. And if they continued, there was a high chance that Israel would be able to knock out more rocket launchers, get to more of those missile production facilities, and further degrade them.
Yes. Let me just come in there. You mentioned about a protracted war between Iran and Israel. Now, in any war situation, each country has their own way of dealing with how they want to carry out the attack. They chose not to use their most recent missiles. They chose to use the missiles which are perhaps even 20 years old or perhaps older. Do you feel Iran was planning for something much longer than this? And if that is the case, can Iran sustain a protracted war with Israel?
Well, I think that Iran certainly had it in its planning that in any engagement with Israel, they had to, be able to continue the fight for 3-4 months. They would be very unwise to think that it was going to be a 12-day war. Look, we got lucky, frankly. For those of us who believe that such a war would have been devastating to global security and the economy, a 12-day war like that actually was probably at the least devastating end of the scale. But Iran and the Iranian planners and Israeli planners would have actually done their planning in terms of a much more protracted conflict. So I think that we dodged a bullet. Of course, we're not out of the woods, because we could get a resumption of these hostilities. There's no trust. There's plenty of reasons why it might happen. There are folks on, all sides of this argument who didn't want it to stop. But it just demonstrates that in today's world, and with the acquisition that Iran has of both missiles and drones, that it can sustain a conflict for a long time. And many people would argue that Israel would not have the resilience to take that pain, that there's a much higher pain threshold in Iran. I'm not sure I particularly like that. I think that really trivializes the pain and suffering of those Iranians who died in much larger numbers, let's not forget, than Israelis. So
Chris,
I think that's for us all.
We've dodged a bullet, but not out of the woods yet. As you mentioned, let me just come to looking forward from here. 2024, a direct conflict between Israel and Iran was considered unprecedented. But now in 2025, in June, we've already seen it happen multiple number of times. What are the chances of it happening again, and how soon?
Well, I think they're high, because Israel now knows that it has still air supremacy. It'll take a long time for the Iranians to build back air defenses. So the Israelis have demonstrated they can do it, that they can get there. So if they need, in their view, to carry out a strike, let's say if they see movement of nuclear materials, then I don't think they will feel quite as constrained as they would have done a couple of years ago. That said, I do think that there are also important dynamics towards getting back to the negotiating table, that the United States and Iran, once this has calmed down a little bit, do have an interest, both of them, in coming to some form of deal. The big question in all of this is, Israel, is it going to accept that? Will Netanyahu accept a negotiated deal to all this? Because that's really the only way forward. That is a way to get inspectors into Iran to ensure that whatever agreement on the nuclear facilities is kept to. But Netanyahu has historically been allergic to such deals and may wish to undermine it. And that could be a reason why he might strike again. He did it the first time, of course, on the 12th of June, basically bombing the negotiating table when he took that decision to commit that aggression on Iran.
Chris, you made some very pertinent points, and as you mentioned, a negotiated deal is definitely the way forward. But as far as Iran is concerned, it already has all its paperwork in place to be out of the IAEA. Will it also step out of the non-proliferation treaty? That's a question which has also been arising recently. We need to wait and watch. Thanks so much for joining us here on the broadcast. That was Chris Doyle joining us from London.